Most narcissists don't choose their victims randomly. They scan for them. Long before you even realize what's happening, they're already studying you, watching how you react, noticing what you tolerate, measuring how much of yourself you're willing to give away. And if you've ever wondered how you ended up in a relationship that slowly drained your confidence, your energy, and even your sense of identity, it probably didn't start with cruelty. It started with attention. That's the part most people don't understand. When people hear the word narcissist, they imagine arrogance, loud confidence, someone obsessed with themselves. But the real danger often appears in a much quieter form, because narcissists are not just self-absorbed. They're observers. They walk into a room and instantly begin reading people. Who is confident? Who is insecure? Who seeks approval? Who tries too hard to be liked? And more importantly, who is kind? That's where the story usually begins, not with weakness, but with empathy. You see, narcissists are drawn to people who care deeply about others, people who listen carefully, people who try to understand before judging, people like you. Because empathy creates something they can use: access. Think about the early stage of most relationships with narcissistic people. At first, they don't criticize you. They admire you. They compliment things about you that others rarely notice. Your sensitivity, your loyalty, your emotional intelligence. It feels validating, almost magical. You think you finally met someone who truly sees you, but what's actually happening is something much more strategic. They're mapping you. Every compliment is also a test. Every conversation is information. They're learning what makes you feel valued and what makes you doubt yourself. And once they know both of those things, they have everything they need. Because narcissists don't control people through force. They control people through emotional contrast. First admiration, then subtle withdrawal, first attention, then confusion. One day they make you feel exceptional. The next day they become distant, cold, or irritated. And suddenly you're trying to understand what changed. You replay conversations in your mind. You analyze your own behavior. You wonder if you said something wrong. And without realizing it, you've already stepped into the role they were hoping you would. You're chasing the version of them that existed in the beginning, the version that made you feel special. But here's the darker part most people never notice until it's too late. Narcissists don't just select victims based on kindness. They look for certain emotional patterns. They pay attention to how quickly you apologize, how uncomfortable you are with conflict, how much responsibility you take for other people's emotions. If you're the kind of person who says, "Maybe it's my fault," during tense moments, that signals something to them. It tells them you might absorb blame. And someone who absorbs blame is much easier to manipulate. Imagine two people hearing the same criticism. One person immediately questions it. They ask for clarification. They challenge it. The other person pauses and thinks, maybe they're right. A narcissist almost always chooses the second person. Not because you're weak, but because you're introspective. You're someone who reflects on your behavior. You care about fairness. You want relationships to work. And ironically, those qualities can make you more vulnerable, because narcissistic dynamics rely on one simple psychological imbalance. One person constantly questioning themselves, while the other person never does. Over time, the pattern becomes predictable. Small criticisms appear. At first, they're subtle. Comments about how sensitive you are, how emotional you can be, how other people might find you difficult. And because you value harmony, you try to adjust. You become more careful with your words, more patient, more understanding. But the more you adapt, the more the boundaries move. And slowly, something strange begins happening inside your mind. You stop trusting your own perception. Situations that once felt clearly wrong now feel confusing. You wonder if you're overreacting. You hesitate before expressing discomfort. You start measuring your reactions against how they might respond. That's when the real shift has happened. Because the relationship is no longer about connection. It's about control. And control rarely looks obvious. It looks like emotional unpredictability. Moments of warmth followed by sudden distance. Praise followed by subtle criticism. Affection followed by silence. The brain hates inconsistency. It tries desperately to resolve it, which is why you might find yourself thinking about that person constantly, trying to understand them, trying to fix things, trying to get back to the version of them that once felt so good. But here's the twist that changes how you see everything. The beginning was never the real version. It was the recruitment phase. Narcissists mirror the qualities you value most. If you admire kindness, they appear compassionate. If you value ambition, they appear driven. If you crave emotional connection, they seem deeply understanding. But mirroring is not the same as authenticity. It's camouflage, a way of creating rapid trust. Because trust lowers your defenses. And lowered defenses make emotional influence much easier. By the time the mask begins to slip, the attachment is already formed. You've invested time, emotion, energy, and walking away no longer feels simple. You keep hoping the person you met at the beginning will return. But the uncomfortable truth is this: they were never returning because that person was designed to attract you, not to stay. Understanding this doesn't just help you recognize narcissists. It helps you recognize the moment someone begins testing your boundaries. The moment criticism starts replacing respect. The moment you feel yourself shrinking to maintain peace. And once you see those moments clearly, something powerful happens. You stop blaming yourself for not handling it better. You stop assuming you misunderstood the situation. You stop believing that kindness requires endless tolerance. Because healthy relationships don't require you to slowly disappear. They don't reward confusion. They don't thrive on imbalance. Real connection feels stable, respectful, predictable in the ways that matter. And perhaps the most important shift happens inside you. You begin paying attention to how someone treats your boundaries, not just how charming they seem at first. Because narcissists can mimic warmth. They can mimic empathy. They can mimic connection. But there's one thing they struggle to mimic for long: respect for limits. The moment someone reacts with irritation, guilt, or manipulation when you assert a boundary, you're no longer seeing the mask. You're seeing the structure underneath it. And once you recognize that structure, the entire dynamic changes. Because the greatest threat to someone who manipulates others is a person who finally trusts their own perception.